Windows Vista became the most hated operating system Microsoft ever shipped. Most people assume they know why, they don't. The operating system that destroyed Microsoft's reputation for 3 years is the same operating system everyone praised when Microsoft rebranded it Windows 7. Same kernel, same architecture, same codebase, different name, different reputation. Here's what actually happened. The codename that predicted everything. Vista did not begin as Vista. It began in 2001 as a project codenamed Longhorn, named after a bar in Whistler, British Columbia, sitting between two ski mountains named Whistler and Blackcomb. The naming logic matters. Whistler became Windows XP. Blackcomb was the next major version planned for 2005, and Longhorn was supposed to be a small transitional release bridging the two. It was supposed to take 2 years. Microsoft spent the following 3 years adding features to Longhorn that were originally intended for Blackcomb. A new file storage system called WinFS, a new security architecture called Palladium, a complete new graphics interface, better search, and a fundamentally restructured codebase. Longhorn became so bloated and internally inconsistent that by 2004, it was effectively non-functional. Microsoft's code had become difficult to compile. Features contradicted each other. The project had no coherent direction. In August 2004, 3 years into development, Microsoft made a decision that rarely happens in software at that scale. They scrapped everything. The entire Longhorn codebase was abandoned. The team restarted using the more stable Windows Server 2003 as the foundation. Everything built between 2001 and 2004 was thrown away. What eventually shipped as Vista in January 2007 was built from scratch on a new foundation in roughly 2 years, with many of the promised features removed, including WinFS and Palladium. 5.5 years of development produced an operating system that had been genuinely restarted halfway through. Nobody outside Microsoft knew this had happened. The Vista Capable sticker and what Microsoft's own executives said. To maintain PC sales during Vista's delayed launch, Microsoft created a program in April 2006 called Windows Vista Capable. PCs labeled Vista Capable carried a sticker indicating they would run Windows Vista. The problem? The minimum specification for Vista Capable was a machine capable of running Vista Home Basic, the stripped-down version of Vista without Aeroglass, without the visual interface features Microsoft had spent years promoting. A more powerful machine that could run the full experience received a different sticker, Vista Premium Ready. Most buyers saw Windows Vista Capable and assumed their new PC could run the full version of Vista they had seen advertised. When they installed Vista, they got Vista Home Basic. No Aero, no premium features, the version nobody had been shown. The internal emails that emerged when the resulting lawsuit entered discovery are damning. Jim Alchin, Microsoft's co-president of Platforms and Services, wrote in one email, "We really botched this." Mike Nash, Microsoft's corporate vice president for Windows product management, wrote, "I personally got burnt. Are we seeing this from a lot of customers? I now have a $2,100 email machine." A senior Microsoft manager told colleagues internally that the Vista Capable campaign had created a mess. These were not public critics. These were the people who ran Windows. A class action lawsuit was filed in 2007, alleging that the Vista Capable marketing program had inflated demand and prices for machines that couldn't run the product as advertised. The suit was certified as a class action in February 2008 and later decertified. But the internal emails it surfaced remain the clearest possible evidence that Microsoft leadership knew the program was misleading consumers and shipped it anyway. The UAC problem. An entire generation trained to click yes. User account control was Vista's most hated feature. Every time a program attempted to make a system change, Vista produced a full-screen dimming effect and a dialog box asking the user to confirm. Security researchers and Microsoft's own security team had identified a real problem. Windows XP allowed any application to run with administrator privileges by default. Malware exploited this constantly. UAC was the right idea, create a permission layer so users could see when a program was trying to do something significant. The execution was badly miscalibrated. Vista's UAC triggered for routine tasks that had nothing to do with security, changing a display setting, moving a file, adjusting volume, opening certain applications. The average Windows Vista user encountered UAC prompts dozens of times per day. Security researchers gave this outcome a name, security theater. When a security prompt appears constantly, for actions that are obviously safe, users stop reading it, they learn to dismiss it. They click yes reflexively without reading what they are confirming. An entire generation of Windows users was trained by Vista's UAC to ignore security warnings. By the time a genuinely dangerous prompt appeared, the muscle memory was, click yes. Microsoft reduced UAC aggressiveness significantly in Windows 7. Vista's contribution to Windows security was, net, negative. It made users less secure by making them less attentive. The driver disaster. It was mostly not Microsoft's fault. Vista's launch was accompanied by a wave of devices that stopped working. Printers, scanners, webcams, graphics cards, audio devices. Peripherals that had worked perfectly on Windows XP suddenly had no driver support under Vista. Users blamed Microsoft. The accurate target was different. Microsoft had briefed hardware manufacturers on Vista's requirements in 2003. They provided documentation, developer tools, and access to pre-release builds for years before the January 2007 launch. The new Windows Display driver model that Vista required was documented and available well in advance. Most hardware manufacturers waited. They did not write Vista drivers until Vista shipped and customers started complaining. At launch, more than 2,000 applications were compatible with Vista, but driver support for consumer hardware peripherals was sparse. The HP printer that stopped working on Vista had not received new drivers because HP had not written them yet. That was HP's decision, not Microsoft's engineering failure. Microsoft deserves blame for many aspects of Vista. The driver shortage at launch is not cleanly one of them. Hardware manufacturers made a business calculation that driver development could wait until after launch. Their customers paid the price. What Windows XP was doing to Vista's reputation. In 2007, Windows XP had been the dominant operating system for 6 years. It was stable. It was familiar. It ran everything. Every piece of software written in that era was written for XP. Every driver, every application, every enterprise workflow. XP was so embedded that businesses had built critical systems around it. Not by accident, but by design, because XP had been stable enough to build on. Patient scheduling software in hospitals, financial processing applications in banks, manufacturing control systems, timekeeping tools that had run without issue for 5 years. In 2008, more than 70% of all computers worldwide were still running Windows XP. Vista needed to convince businesses and consumers who had working systems to pay for an upgrade that made their printers stop working, ran slower on their hardware, and demanded constant permission to do things they had always done without asking. The U.S. Department of Transportation prohibited employees from upgrading to Vista, citing concerns over cost and compatibility. The University of Pittsburgh Medical Center reported that its Vista rollout was significantly behind schedule because several key applications, including patient scheduling software, were not compatible. XP's installed base was not simply nostalgia, it was a rational calculation. I have an operating system that works, and this new one doesn't. When businesses ran the analysis, Vista consistently failed the justification test. The cost of upgrading hardware to meet Vista's requirements, retraining staff, and replacing incompatible software outweighed any benefit Vista offered in enterprise environments. Many businesses did not make that calculation wrong. They were right, and every month that Vista failed to win those businesses, the negative reputation compounded. Apple, who was running the Get a Mac campaign throughout Vista's entire lifespan, was not wasting the opportunity. What Steve Ballmer was actually hearing from Dell. Dell, Microsoft's largest PC manufacturing partner, was so frustrated with Vista's performance on consumer hardware that they took a step that had never occurred before in Windows history. They began offering Windows XP as a downgrade option on new Vista machines. A customer could buy a new PC in 2007 and explicitly request that Vista be removed and replaced with XP. Dell called this program the XP option. It was not a fringe offering. It was heavily requested by customers who had already tried Vista and returned to XP, or who had seen enough reviews to decline Vista entirely. Microsoft was receiving direct feedback from its most important hardware partner that their current operating system was being actively rejected at the point of sale. This had no precedent in Windows history. No previous version of Windows had driven customers to specifically request its predecessor be reinstalled. SP1 and 551 fixes. In March 2008, 14 months after Vista launched, Microsoft released Service Pack 1. SP1 incorporated 551 documented hotfixes, patches that had been available individually on request but were not included in the standard installation. The number is significant. 551 fixes in 14 months for an operating system that had been in development since 2001. The complete list of everything SP1 corrected was published by Microsoft in a technical document titled Notable Changes in Windows Vista SP1. That document ran to 24 pages. Microsoft never published a corresponding document titled, "Here is what was broken at launch." Reading SP1's changelog in reverse is the closest approximation to that document. SP1 fixed file copy operations that had been inexplicably slow. It fixed memory management issues. It fixed driver stability problems. It adjusted UAC behavior. It fixed networking performance degraded by an audio subsystem bug. None of these were small problems. All of them shipped. What Vista actually invented. The correct accounting of Vista requires acknowledging what it introduced that became essential. Things so embedded in Windows today that most users assume they always existed. Volume shadow copy. The ability to right-click a file and restore a previous version was introduced in Vista. It is now considered a core Windows feature available on every installation. The concept that a user could recover a document they accidentally overwrote without running third-party recovery software came from Vista. BitLocker full disk encryption, the enterprise standard for laptop security worldwide, was introduced in Vista. Every organization that encrypts its laptops today, whether they know it or not, is using technology Vista introduced. Windows Search that actually works, the indexed instant result search that finds files by name and content without waiting, was introduced in Vista, built from the search capabilities of WinFS after the full file system was canceled. Vista's Start menu search, where you press the Windows key and type to launch anything, replaced XP's infamously slow search crawler. DirectX 10, the graphics API that enabled rendering techniques unavailable in the DirectX 9 era, shipped exclusively with Vista. Every PC game released between 2007 and 2011 that used DX10 required Vista. This is a significant detail. The Windows version that gamers blamed for ruining their experience was simultaneously the only platform enabling the next generation of gaming graphics. The user account control architecture, hated as implemented, but correct in principle, became the foundation for Windows security models that have continued through Windows 11. None of these were inevitable. They were designed and shipped under Vista, under development conditions that were chaotic, under a timeline that had been collapsed by 4 years of Longhorn's failure. Vista's legacy is not only the printer that stopped working. The real reason Vista failed: the hardware. Vista ran correctly on hardware that met its actual requirements. The problem was what Microsoft defined as meeting requirements. Vista Capable machines, the 19.4 million PCs sold with that sticker, were certified on hardware from 2003 standards. When Vista's full interface loaded on those machines, it was slow because those machines lacked the GPU and RAM that Vista had been designed around. The operating system ran correctly on hardware that met its actual requirements. The problem was that most of the hardware sold as Vista Capable did not meet those requirements, and Microsoft had allowed this to happen by setting the Vista Capable bar at hardware from 2003. A machine with integrated graphics and 512 megabytes of RAM was certified Vista Capable. Vista had been designed around a dedicated GPU and at least a gigabyte of RAM. Those two specifications were not the same machine. Vista's reputation was built almost entirely by users running it on hardware that could not adequately support it, not by users running it on hardware that could. The Mojave Experiment, what happened when Microsoft hid the name. In 2008, facing Vista's terminal reputation, Microsoft ran a social experiment. They recruited people who rated Windows Vista poorly, some who had never used it at all, and told them they were going to preview a new operating system codenamed Mojave. They showed a live demonstration of Mojave. People liked it. They said it was clean, fast, and attractive. They gave it an average rating of 8.5 out of 10. Then the researcher revealed, "This is Windows Vista." The reaction, captured on video and released publicly, ranged from disbelief to laughter. People who had rated Vista near 0, who had called it unusable, slow, and embarrassing, had just rated a demonstration of it 8.5. Microsoft's conclusion: Vista's reputation had become self-fulfilling. People expected to dislike it and arrived at their experience already prepared to find fault. The technology writer Paul Thurrott, who had been among Vista's harshest early critics, later reflected that Vista had been judged by a compounding negative cycle. Early bad impressions amplified by media coverage, amplified by person-to-person conversation, until the reputation existed independently of most people's actual experience. The Mojave Experiment proved that on hardware that met its requirements, shown to people without the baggage of the name, Vista produced a satisfactory experience. It did not save Vista's reputation, but it confirmed something important. Vista's failure was partly technical, partly a PR catastrophe, and partly a case study in how a product can be destroyed by the first wave of impressions more thoroughly than by its own defects. Windows 7 is Vista. The thing Microsoft never said. Windows 7 launched in October 2009 and was celebrated as the return to form after Vista's disaster. Reviewers called it fast, clean, and reliable. Users who had abandoned Vista praised it as evidence that Microsoft had finally got it right. What Microsoft never publicly said: Windows 7 is Vista. Technically, Windows 7 is kernel version NT 6.1. Vista is NT 6.0. They share the same architecture, the same driver model, the same fundamental codebase. Windows 7 is Vista with SP1's fixes baked in, UAC reduced to a less aggressive level, driver compatibility improved by 2 years of manufacturer updates, and hardware requirements better aligned with what was actually being sold. The hardware improvements happened not because Microsoft changed anything, but because 2 years passed and GPU and RAM prices dropped enough that average consumer PCs had caught up to what Vista required. Every person who said Windows 7 is amazing, Vista was terrible, was using a refined version of the same operating system they had rejected. Microsoft allowed that narrative to stand. Correcting it would have required defending Vista, and Vista was not worth defending publicly. The quiet acknowledgement of what Vista actually was lives in the version number, NT 6.0 to NT 6.1. Same operating system, better launch conditions, better reputation. Vista is one entry on Microsoft's long list of decisions that didn't land. Every major Windows mistake explained. It's on screen right now.